Welcome back. We are glad you are still with us. If in case you are just joining us, Karibu tena sana to the program. This, as always, is Good Morning Kenya. I am Jain Wambui. Now, from that particular press briefing by the CS there, I'm sure if you missed anything, you can be able to log on to www.education.gov. And also, if you are a parent, all the information in regards to the formal selection process, you can find that on NEMIS. Go ahead and just log in and you'll be able to find all the information that you need in case your child was a candidate during the 2020 KCPE exams. Now, we move on to the next conversation, and this is all about what will be happening tomorrow. Tomorrow being the 16th day of June, we will be celebrating the International Day for the African Child. This is the day that is celebrated every year to just look at the challenges that our African children are facing and how we can always make sure that we are progressing as opposed to regressing when it comes to these age-old problems that we have been dealing with. In studio this morning, I have two guests with me who are going to be helping us better put this conversation into perspective. I'll start with the only gentleman with us in studio this morning. From the previous conversation, all men, now we have women running here. But the only gentleman with us on set, he is Mr. Alex Wamakobe. He is the Assistant Director of the Children's Service Station at the National Council for Children's Services. Good morning.
Morning, Jen.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And the other lady with me on set, she is Pauline Kedogo Enubi, who is the SOS at Children's Villages Kenya. Good morning, Pauline.
Good morning.
Thank you for making time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Remember, you can also be part of this conversation. We are using the hashtag Good Morning Kenya on Twitter. At KBC Channel 1 is our official station handle. My handle is at Jain Wambui. Questions, comments, clarifications, we welcome them. We will be addressing them as we continue with this conversation. So let's just dive right into it. You know, when we talk about the Day for the African Child, people would think ni siku ya kuvaa vitenge, you know, I'm an African child, I will adorn my African regalia, without really understanding the history behind this day. So let me start with you, Pauline. You know, when we talk about the Day of the African Child, where did it originate from?
Okay. Thank you very much, Jane, and I'm happy to be here just to pass information on this day. And basically, as we look at the theme today, it takes us back to looking at the African child and the rights of this African child. So it takes us back to South Africa in 1976 when we had the uprising, and the children went on the streets to actually demonstrate and protest in issues related to access to education, the very conversation that you're actually trying to have today. So this day is commemorated because of those children who went on the streets to actually advocate for their rights to education. And the African Union, which was then the Organization of African Union, came together in 1991 to actually recognize this day. So when we look back, we are asking ourselves, what have we done as the African continent to ensure that children within the African continent are able to access their rights? And we take stock of that and look at the challenges that these children might be experiencing, and also celebrate some of the key milestones that we've actually been able to ensure that these children are able to access these rights. Absolutely. So the history is tied to the protests on the streets, access to education, but it also unpacked an opportunity for the African continent to place the agenda of the rights of children within the map.
Absolutely. The Soweto uprising, and you know, as much as it was heavily focused on education, it also brings to light all these other aspects of our children's lives that are violated on a daily. So as we talk about our children's rights, especially when it comes to the education, we want to look at it from a wholesome point of thinking. And let me come to you, Alex. You know, just looking at us as a country, because again, we have to take stock of how far we have come. We're not just looking at the problems. We have gained, we've made traction over the years. So looking at us as a country, just bringing it down to Kenya, how are we faring when it comes to our children's right? Maybe just give us a status update on how we are doing.
Thank you so much, Jen, and happy to be on board.
Absolutely.
To discuss this important day to us as a government. It's quite an important day because as Pauline has said, we commemorate the Soweto massacre. But you don't just commemorate it, but we also celebrate the dignity of the African child.
Absolutely.
Knowing that the child is quite an important person to us. And for the country, as a country, the child is quite key. Kenya has made a lot of strides as far as child protection is concerned, and I think along the interview we'll be able to enumerate so many things that is done along the way.
All right.
Yes, in different aspects.
Yes. Maybe you could also add to that, Pauline, just from where you stand, especially with the children's village, you're in touch with the children a lot, and you can be able to even get to hear from them, what they feel they are benefiting. Because, sometimes we tend to look over our children's opinions because they are children, we speak for them. But looking at over the past 3 decades, how much have we moved forward when it comes to our children's rights?
Yeah. So thank you very much. And just to echo what Mr. Wamakobe has actually stated is that, first of all, we have to appreciate the fact that in Kenya we have a robust policy and legal framework that speaks to the rights of children. So we are looking at the Constitution, for example, that talks about the rights of children enshrined under Article 53, and the other provisions within the Bill of Rights, the functions of the county and the national government, amongst others. And then we also have other laws that specifically talk about the rights of children. For example, when it comes to education, we have the Basic Education Act. We have laws that speak to sexual abuse, amongst others. So we do have these policy frameworks. We have national plans of action for children. We have guidelines in place. We have standard operating procedures. And definitely even with the court system, when the Chief Justice usually comes up with directions of practice. So all this provide us with a framework on how we are supposed to engage children from the policy front.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, the government has come up with different systems and structures. For example, Mr. Wamakobe, who works at the Council for Children's Services, we also have the Department of Children's Services that is, has the mandate to come up with child-friendly programs.
Yes.
The Council, on the other hand, comes up with policies, the child-friendly policies, and conducts monitoring, amongst other issues. Then we also have spaces for children to participate within the Kenyan context as part of the progress.
Yes.
We have platforms such as the Children's Assemblies. We have the Child Rights Clubs, where children are able to air their views, voice their concerns, and even participate on issues of development within the country. And then, of course, as we progress, we are also looking into allocation of resources by the government. For example, a few days ago, the budget was read. The allocation of these resources towards the Department of Children, towards the Council, towards the Child Welfare Society, issues related to social protection, amongst others. So we've made progress on that front. And over the years, there's also the issues related to coordination between different stakeholders. Yes. So we have the ministries, we have the departments, we have the agencies, we have civil society organizations, we have the media, the role played to ensure that we raise awareness on the rights of children. So in terms of progress, this is how far we have come. And definitely, as we continue with the conversation, we'll continue to pick some bits and pieces of what we've been able to do and some of the areas where we actually need to improve on.
I like the fact that you've mentioned, it's not a one-man job. Multi-stakeholder responsibility comes into it plays a huge role when it comes to rights of our children. And I just want us to look at the past 1 year, because the past year or so has taught us so much as a global population. When the pandemic hit, everything was just turned upside down. And as we celebrate all these milestones that we have made over the years, there's still some areas that we ought to do better. And I just want us to just look at some of those challenges that we are facing, and more so our children are facing when it comes to their rights. And we're living in a time where violence against children is reported on a daily. Just the other day, there's the abduction of Chantal, a case that is still ongoing. Almost every day, let's just put it at a week, there's no week that has passed without a case involving a child being reported. Remember when the pandemic hit, cases of sexual violence just blew off the roof. Now, I want us to look at some of these challenges and just maybe what we can do as a population to help alleviate them and move forward, in as much as the pandemic just brought a whole other reality. And let's just start with sexual violence. And even per what the judiciary put out is that most of the sexual violence cases that were reported, the perpetrator was someone within a very close, almost family to these children. Let me start with you, Alex. Looking at the fact that perpetrators, when it comes to sexual violence, are mostly people that children trust, how can we help the situation?
Thank you again, Jen. Maybe before I go, just to add on what Pauline has said about the gains that you made.
Yes.
Of what it to mention is that we had the Children's Act, we have it, which is still functioning since 2001, and it came into effect in 2002. But now with the changes in society is dynamic, there are a lot of changes coming up, emerging issues. We are coming up with a children's bill, which will address quite a number of those issues that are basically affecting us as a society.
Yes.
And the bill is in Parliament, and is a prayer that by the end of the year it will pass into law.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now let's come to these challenges, the loopholes that I've just mentioned, in line with making sure that our children's rights are waterproof, airtight. Let me start still with you, Alex. The question of sexual violence and the fact that most of the perpetrators are people that our children trust. What do you think even fuels this in the beginning?
I think, as I mentioned, the society is dynamic. And if you look at it, you're looking at the family, the changes in the societal norms, the traditional values that we had, like we're running away from them.
Yes.
Because it's quite unfortunate that you find an uncle defiling a niece, a stepfather beating up a stepchild. It's quite unfortunate. And as the government is quite concerned on that. Last year, they launched the Violence Against Children survey, which revealed that 60% of all adults had experienced some form of violence in their childhood. And violence, I'm talking about sexual violence, physical violence, and emotional violence.
Okay.
It's quite an unfortunate state of affair, but as a government, we are coming up with ways and means to address it.
Absolutely.
There are structures in place that really should address some of these things. We have in places reporting mechanisms. Like right now, it's quite easy to report violence. You just call the toll-free line 116, or you can call me at the police station 112. They're ready to accommodate that. We have facilities like the DCI, Child Protection Unit, that looks at trafficking against children and also violation of their rights.
Yes.
As a government, we're also expanding the structure on the ground, where right now we have almost children officers in all the sub-counties in the country, which is quite a milestone.
Yes.
From 20 years down the line, when we had only maybe 50 or so. So the response mechanism that the government is coming up is quite strong to address some of these challenges. But that said and done, we understand that as we move forward, there are also challenges that are coming into place. And as she said, we work hand in hand with our partners to try and address some of these challenges.
Okay. Yes. Now, let me come to you, Pauline. I like the fact that you've mentioned, all these avenues that are available as my mug continues to fall down. These avenues that have been made available, the reporting mechanisms that have also been put in place. Clearly, there's effort that is coming in, especially from the government. But now let's come to us as a people. And I still want to look at that aspect of sexual violence. We are also living in a time where cases involving sexual violence that are within a family setup, you find families choose to settle this outside court, away from the station, and semaini mambo ya familia tutaongelea, and consequently denying this child the justice that they deserve. How can the message be sent to the people to understand that any sexual violence perpetrated against the child, the perpetrator needs to face the consequences regardless of who they are in this child's life?
Okay, thank you very much. And just to echo what Mr. Wamakobe has actually mentioned, and just to make this a reality for us, is to understand that statistically, as we are seated here, every 5 minutes, a child dies as a result of violence.
Every 5 minutes.
Every 5 minutes that we are seated here, there's a child somewhere dying as a result of violence. And as he has expounded on it, physical, emotional, the sexual, psychological, all those. So what we need to do is to raise awareness on these issues. And I'll take us back to last year when we had the status report on children within the justice system. The report was launched by the National Council on the Administration of Justice, Special Task Force on Children Matters. And one of the gaps that you're actually talking about is one of the things that has been highlighted there. Because the moment we seek to ensure that we are dealing with these issues within the family, we are actually denying these children justice.
And protecting the perpetrator.
Exactly. So it means that all the key stakeholders or all the players are supposed to come on board. So we have the family, we have the child, we have the community, we have the legal enforcement officers, we have the judicial officers, we have the children's office, we have the ODPP, we have the judiciary. All these people will have to come together to ensure that this child is able to access justice. When you go back to the Violence Against Children report, on issues related to sexual abuse, you look at it from the perspective of statistics in terms of the ages. We have children below the age of 15, those from 15 and above. And these statistics are very shocking for us. So we need to be aware that some of these things that we are doing will actually affect these children to the point even when they become adults, and it becomes cyclic. So it becomes a cycle of violence.
The violence that was perpetrated on
exactly.
them, they get to a point in life where they may, it is not always given, but they may also be in a position of power and perpetrate the same.
Yes. So what we also need to do is to ensure that, one, we are actually implementing the findings of this report, the Violence Against Children report. We have that report on access to justice for children. We have also the report when the president was making one of his addresses during this COVID period, he actually ordered for a research to be conducted on the increasing cases of children being abused and domestic abuse within the family. So the report is available by the Crime Research Institute, and some of these findings actually have to be implemented. So putting the mechanisms on board, arresting the perpetrators, ensuring access to justice, in a timely manner, and also ensuring that these children are able to access other services. For example, services related to psychosocial support, counseling, being able to get, the P3 forms, being able to get, medical attention within the shortest time period. And it also speaks to the provisions of Article 53 on the rights of children. Because under that, there are provisions on fair trial, there are provisions on access to justice for children, and also protecting children from all forms of abuse and violence.
Now, I want us to...
Jain, maybe before you, just to add on what she's saying.
Sure.
As we look at the reactive bit on how to tackle violence against children, you also need to look at what causes it.
Address the root cause.
Address the root cause, and some of these things are quite deep-rooted. And here I'm talking about the issues of culture, traditions. We are looking at the girl child marriages in society. These are things that we need to address solidly. Because child marriages are deeply rooted in traditions. Attitude change. As she mentioned about awareness change, is quite important that we get the root cause of these problems and tackle it. And as I mentioned, we work hand in hand with stakeholders. There are quite a lot of people talking about the religious leaders, why they came in this. The traditional was this on the ground.
The elders, they have a voice.
A huge role to play. Now, the other aspect that also in one way or the other could be related to culture, and this is all about child labor. When children were reporting back to school, thousands did not go back to school, and more so the boys. Most of the reasons that were given were, economic reasons, not going back to school to be able to help when it comes to fending for the family, and you cannot judge them. But when it comes to child labor, what can be done to just make sure that children do not always have to resort to looking for employment when they are underage, just to be able to help
keep their families alive. Let me start with you, Pauline.
Yeah. So on issues related to child labor, and we are looking at 4 days back when we actually commemorated the International Day Against Child Labor. And what we first of all need to do is to ensure that the family is supported to be able to access the basic needs.
Necessities.
So we are talking about social protection within our country. We're looking at the cash transfers, the OVCs, the persons living with disabilities, the hunger and safety nets, amongst others. So we need to come up with systems where the family is able to be supported so that in turn those caregivers can be able to support these children.
And not the other way around.
And not the other way around. We are also looking at access to other basic services such as education. Education being a right enshrined again within the Constitution, Article 53. So do we have systems that have been put in place to ensure that all children are able to access education so that they are in school and not on the streets begging, so that they are able to fend for their families? So access to those other basic rights. And then when we are working in the space of collaborating with other partners, for example, the private sector, we have what we call the child, the business principles related to child rights. So how does the private sector, for example, ensure that it's not engaging children to provide some sort of labor? So for example, at KBC, are we engaging children as the private sector, for example? So this is to ensure that the private sector also comes on board and they are not engaging children within the chain of the labor. So there's also that aspect of collaborating with the other partners.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, due to the interest of time, I want us to just hasten this conversation a bit. Just jump Kedogo and look at some of the plans that lay ahead, and especially when it comes to children rights, and especially the Agenda 2040. And that is something that most people have no idea about. And let me just start with you, Alex. You know, when we talk about Agenda 2040, we know about Agenda 2030, matters development of the country, but narrowing it down to our children, when we talk about Agenda 2040, very briefly, what is enshrined in this particular document?
Thank you, Jen, again. It's good to mention, when you talk about Agenda 2040, it's good to mention the theme of this year celebration. Because as we celebrate the Day of the African Child, each year there comes a different theme. Last year we had access to child-friendly justice. And this year's theme is 30 years after the adoption of the Charter. That's the African Charter on the Rights and the Welfare of the Children.
Yes.
Accelerate implementation of Agenda 2040 for an African fit for children. And where it came about, this Agenda 2040 is in 2016, the Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child at the African Union realized the need to come up with clear strategies on how we can restore the dignity of the child. So it came up with 10 aspirations that member states would aspire to meet within the next 25 years from 2016. That's now 2040.
Yeah.
And among them, we have aspiration 1, which talks about the African Charter, Children's Charter itself, as an effective continental framework for advancing children's rights. We have aspiration 2, effective child-friendly national legislative policy and institutional framework in place.
Yes.
We have aspiration 3, which mentions about every child's birth and other vital statistics being registered. Agenda 4, which talks about every right, or rather every child's right to survive and have a healthy childhood. Agenda 5, which talks about a child growing up well nourished and access to basic necessities of life. And then aspiration 6, which talks about full benefits from quality education. That's for each child. And then Agenda 7 talks about the children being protected against violence, exploitation, neglect, and abuse. And then aspiration 8, which talks about children benefiting from a child-sensitive criminal justice system. Then Agenda 9 talks about every child being free from the impact of armed conflicts and other disasters of emergency solutions.
Yes.
And then lastly, aspiration 10 which talks about child participation.
Absolutely. I love that you've mentioned that, and it's well in line with what we are doing and starting from the house setup. Child participation. It is something that, to some extent, as parents, you're like, I am the parent here. You will not tell me what you need. I know what you need. But if we want to have a truly honest conversation, how can we involve our children in a healthy way when it comes to matters involving them, and especially their rights, in a way that is mostly beneficial to them, and a way that we as the parents, the guardians, and all stakeholders can sustain? Let me hear from you, Pauline.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, child participation, first of all, is a basic human right for children. It's enshrined in our constitution again, provisions on public participation for citizens, including children. In Kenya, we have the child participation guidelines that have been were developed in 2008, and they basically provide the framework of how we need to engage and involve children. So participation in this case is providing opportunities for these children to be able to raise concerns on anything that involves them. And Kenya has provided those platforms for children. We have the children's assemblies that are supported by the National Council for Children's Services and the Department of Children's Services. And these assemblies bring children representatives from the county as well as at the national level, where they're able to discuss on different matters that involve them. We've had these children participating in policy reform processes. For example, the Children's Bill. The voice of the child is in that bill. They've given ideas on the kind of country they'd want to see within the bill. Then we also have other platforms within the community, such as the child rights clubs within the schools. So these are spaces provided within the schools where children are also able to sit, challenge on different matters that concern them. And when you also look at some of the policies and laws, such as the Basic Education Act, it actually talks about the board of management, and within that board of management there needs to be a student representative who voices the concerns of children. So what we need to be asking ourselves is how well are we in terms of providing these platforms? Are they working? Are they effective? Because we've actually had children moving parliament on a number of issues. They do write memorandums, they petition the country through the parliament, and parliament has also been able to respond to them and give feedback to different policy makers. So child participation is a right, so we actually just need to do a bit more and provide children with these platforms for them to be able to engage.
And maybe just to build on what...
And as you build on that, you can also speak on the aspect of awareness now among us, the guardians, the parents, and anyone who is in a position to care for a child. How can we even create awareness in a way that, let's just understand the fact that we are Africans. And with Africans, culture dictates that children will respect and obey parents. It's even enshrined in the Bible. But understanding that they are also humans and we need to also listen to them. You can also add that. Okay,
before I add on to that, maybe just add on what Pauline has mentioned, which is quite important to us, is that as the council, as the National Council of Children's Services, we are mandated to come up with various policies and guidelines affecting the child. And as we develop the policies, any policy that we develop, we must hear from the children. What are their views? We must include the views of the children, including when the children's bill that now is in parliament. Children participated quite heavily in it. Now turning back to your other question.
The question of awareness.
The culture, the family. Because I'm sure your concern is within the family. Yes, outside there we have structures where children communicate. What happens within the family? I think we need to also look at the dynamics of society. We have evolved from that traditional setup where we used to be with our grandparents, our shoshos around there. We are now within the house. And as parents, we need to recognize that this child that we are seated with in the house has got rights. The child needs to be heard. Look at a teenager. We need to appreciate that their concerns are valid.
To start with.
They are valid. Whatever they are going through right now is not what we went through Because many times we tend to think for
you
the child.
compare our childhood to theirs.
Yes.
These children are spoiled.
Yes. Yes.
You know, back in our day,
Yes.
we didn't used to wear shoes.
No, not knowing that the kids nowadays
Times are
have
different.
got smartphones.
Yeah.
The kids nowadays have got internet in the house, and with internet anything is possible.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Now, as I'm being told, we are almost out of time. But before we get to close this conversation, maybe let me start with you, Alex. You know, as we mark the Day of the African Child tomorrow, what will be your message to our viewers, teachers, parents, guardians, and even the government when it comes to observing this day and understanding we all have a role to play?
Thank you, Jen. As we mark the day tomorrow, let's realize that the child is not the concern of the government alone. The child is a government of all, is a concern for all concerned, be it the teachers, be it the parents, be it religious leaders, and we each have a role to play.
Absolutely.
And we need to recognize that and take it up. And my concern, especially, is in reporting of child abuse cases. Because many times we turn a blind eye to that. You find a neighbor hears a child crying the next door, the child being abused, they don't report. Why? Because they fear. They fear. I think we need to get out of that fear.
It goes back to awareness.
Absolutely.
All right.
Awareness.
Maybe Pauline could also just take less than a minute. Just your call to action message, and especially even to our children. And this does not say that you go declaring to a parent, you know, we had this on KBC, so you must do this and this. As a child, know how to express yourself. But then again, your call to action message to anyone who has a role to play when it comes to the rights of our children.
Okay.
This is your camera right there.
So my call to action, number one, we've talked about the policy frameworks in our country. My first call to action is the enactment of a children's bill, because it provides that platform to deal with some of these issues we are talking about, violence against children, participation, amongst others. Number two, we need to invest in children, public investment in children. So this speaks to budget allocation, financial human resource allocation towards child welfare programming and child protection programs. And lastly, we need to implement the existing laws and policies. We also need to implement the provisions within the various reports that have already been, you know, disseminated.
All right.
Yes.
That brings us to a close of this particular segment, all about the Day of the African Child, which will be marked tomorrow, the 16th day of June, as has been every year. And the theme for this year is all about 30 years after the adoption of the Charter, accelerate the implementation of Agenda 2040 for an Africa fit for children. What are we doing to just make sure that our Africa is fit for all our children? We have been speaking with Pauline Kedogo, who is the SOS at the Children's Village, Kenya, as well as Alex Wamakobe, who is the Assistant Director of Children's Service Station at the National Council for Children Services. My name is Jain Wambui. Thank you so much for being with us. Be sure to join us again tomorrow. Have a lovely day. God bless. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.